crash my. Yeah, that was pretty intense.
It was.
All right.
Single party state. We all consent.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming out and spending some time with us as we talk about generative AI policies and controls around generative AI and what we need to do to make sure that our users and our systems are secure. This is part of the IC2 official chapter. And you can see the logoed tablecloth behind us. It's pretty awesome. But we are excited to have you with us and talk today. We want this to be a collaborative discussion as we go through. We have some panelists. We've got some topics that we've been chatting about a little bit. So hopefully it'll be a solid discussion and we'll all learn a little bit. I do want to thank our friends at Ostrich Cyber Risk for sponsoring this event. That without them, we would all not be here right now for sure, because I was 20 minutes away from having to reschedule this, and the owner called me back after I sent him a text and was willing and on short notice to sponsor us for the location. So thank you very much for that. So with that, Carl, if you want to introduce yourself and then tell a little bit about Ostrich and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Carl Peterson. Work at Ostrich here. Ostrich Cyber Risk, we do have an application to assist companies with their qualitative risk analysis based on this CSF and quantitative risk analysis based on the open fair model. So it's an application to go in and do all kinds of scenarios and modeling and some great stuff. So yeah, if you'd like to learn more on that at this point.
Very cool. And we've got some pens and eggs.
Pens, eggs,
And egg.
anything else?
Stress eggs. I've never seen stress eggs before. That's pretty cool. All right, so we'll have our panelists next introduce themselves, just tell a little bit about their background, what they do, where they came from. So go ahead, and Craig, if you want to start.
Sure.
And then we'll just come down the line, introduce our panelists, and we've got Ren as well. That'll close us up.
All right. Name is Craig Olson. I've spoken at a couple of IC2 meetings in the past, so this is not your first time hearing me speak. I'm sorry. You know, but no, it's good. I've been at Liberty Mutual for 18 years. 15 of those years I've been working in cybersecurity. I'm a cybersecurity architect, like Josh. So for majority of my career, I've been very AppSec oriented. Cloud security has been another thing. That's what I've spoken a lot here at the IC2 events. And generative AI was one of those things that was just thrown to me back in January. He said, go learn about this. So I've spent the last probably 6 months of my career spending way too much time in generative AI. It's almost making me start to twitch a little. It's kind of like that Mufasa moment where you're like, but outside of that, I was, and then other than that, I was an adjunct professor. I taught graduate IT courses when I used to live back in New England, and I've been in Utah. I moved here about 6 years ago. So, and that's about it for me. So there you go.
Or we'll cut you off with the recording.
Yeah, we'll cut it. Yeah, I know. Exactly. You can edit that out. I'm not even here. Yeah.
Awesome. Juan Carlos.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Juan Carlos. I always have to apologize beforehand because I'm always the least technical person in the room. I have a law background. I started my career working in commercial regulatory matters, contracts, that kind of fun stuff. Found my niche in GRC, so governance, risk, and compliance, and that's what I've been doing ever since. Currently work as a principal of compliance and security at a startup called ThoroughPass, and where I've been, I guess the last year now.
Awesome. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Ken Allen, 25-ish years, background in technology consulting and architecture. Currently working for AWS as a security specialist, focusing on AWS native security services and also helping customers implement security roadmaps. Been in Utah about 6 years, 5.5 years, moved here from Texas. Yeah, it's probably been about the last 8 years of my career has been focused in some area of security.
Awesome. And my name is Mark Kress. I'll be your moderator. That's one of my best skills. Apparently, I've done a lot of moderating of discussions lately. I think this is my 5th or 4th. So almost as many events as Craig has put on for us. So it's pretty good. But I am the let's see, vice president of the ISC2 chapter, Vince Romney, who's the president. Him and I and Ken work together to pull together cybersecurity events like this, try and find good topics and good people to present and talk and share with us about things. I just realized that I forgot to have Ren introduce himself. I got ahead of myself. So I'll pause right there because
No, you can finish yours out and then I'll go.
Okay. So I've been in operations and security for about 15 years now. Started out as network admin, but love security. While I was paying my way through school, I did physical security in installing camera systems and access control back in the day when it was just like big relays inside of panels that handled access control, like the cart swipes. And went all the way through school and saw that digitize, and then got involved in networking and security, and have run operations and security teams for like the last 10 years. So, and then got involved with IC2 now 5 years ago, give or take.
Yeah.
I think Ken was at the first event, which Craig spoke at. That's where I first met Ken, and Ken and I have been friends since then through this, and actually he's the one that pulled me over to AWS. So it's a fun group to be a part of, a lot of sharing of information and good folks to work with. So with that, Ren, if you want to introduce yourself and then we'll get started.
Yeah, certainly. I apologize I could not be there in person. I wanted to be, and we just had a ton of house things that kind of creeped up. We've got some concrete work and fence work and other stuff, and so I wasn't able to be there in person. But my name is Ren Ewer. I work for Microsoft as Microsoft's One Cloud SOC triage principal manager. Been with Microsoft since 2012 and started with Xbox, Microsoft Gaming, and helping to build the SOC for that organization. Later, we expanded that to a larger SOC. We call it the Cyber Defense Operations Center, which has kind of a hub and spoke model where we have technical duty officers and executive duty officers sit in there. And then we have single points of contact for each of those. Now what we're in the process of doing is consolidating and kind of collapsing that down into the CDOC one SOC. So we're really kind of focused a lot on that side of things. I've been in cybersecurity almost 20 years, give or take, coming up on that. My expertise really is in blue teaming, building blue teams, purple teams, and doing all of the defense in depth across our tools, people, and skills, and really driving the type of analytic skilling that we need in order to find the bad guys. I get to spend my day looking for bad guys and working with our legal teams and working with our service teams and working with our customers within Azure in order to protect Microsoft as well as our customers. And that's a lot of fun for me. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Yor. So like I said in the beginning, do want this to be interactive. So we have a list of questions that we'll go through, but as we talk, if I'll pause, we'll in between and ask for questions from the group that's gathered here, and for the people online, you can either chat in questions and or unmute, raise your hand, we'll unmute, or then you can unmute, and then you can ask questions as well. But just want this to be interactive, hopefully a good discussion and give people an opportunity to learn things. So we'll start with our panelists. A question that I want to start with is, in your current role, what's the impact of generative AI within that role? And Craig, we heard you spent 6 months researching already. So maybe we'll start with you,
Sure.
since you've been researching for 6 months, and then just from there, I mean, whoever wants to go next, go next.
Yeah. So I mean, I think this is one of these. We had a little call on Tuesday, and I made the comment that I think generative AI is impacting enterprise businesses in a way that hasn't been seen by any technology probably since the advent of the internet browser. I say that because it's one of those where it was an avalanche, right? They talk about technologies, how long it takes them to get 100 million users. It was 75 years for the telephone, or, you know, how long for the internet. We're talking months, weeks of just incredible growth. And so what happened, Josh and I worked for an insurance company, and suddenly there was this huge interest because it just wasn't, hey, this thing can summarize my email, right? This isn't something because, you know, okay, that's not going to change your business. It was, can we use this? And there were some real interesting use cases. Can we start looking through our claims documents and using this to streamline our claims process? And that's almost a game changer in terms of efficiency. So I think that was just one of those. It came in real rapid. And I remember talking to some of our lawyers, and they said that prior till ChatGPT was released in, what was it, November 30th or December 1st, something like that. They said that they had told the board of directors that they were going to have a generative AI, you know, kind of vision. And they originally said, you know, we'd like to have it by 2025. And he said about 2 weeks after he had committed to that, they're like, could you have that in 2024? And they said by mid-January, can you have that by the end of the year? And then by February 1st, it was, can you have it by June? And then it was, can you have it by the end of February? That the interest amongst executives had rolled so fast that they were like, we want to use this. We see the capabilities, and because of that, there was a lot of interest, like, we want to use it. Now, what kind of went with that was, with all new technologies, and I saw this when our company adopted the cloud, it was break as fast as you can. We don't know what it is, we don't understand, so just don't do anything. And that isn't really the approach that was needed. There was so much kind of desire to try to expand and utilize these that it was, okay, we have to figure out where that ground is at. And so, but I think, you know, from our company's perspective, you know, others may, you know, maybe it's just that we're exploring what it looks like. But I think for where we were at, it was definitely, we viewed it as, if we're not using it, we know our competitors are, right? And so we don't want to be behind that, because if they're able to be more efficient in process or do whatever, then we're now playing catch up, and that's market share that we're going to have to try to pull back. So that was at least what I experienced early on in terms of, and we can talk more about what we've done since.
Yeah, awesome. Bryn, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I love what Craig just shared. I think, you know, the impact in each industry is going to be game changing for that industry and for the companies within their respective industries. You know, we're using generative AI within Microsoft across our tools. So like Teams, you know, other products within Microsoft Office, opportunities within Bing, like we have it within Azure. There's the Azure OpenAI, and now we're starting to branch out into an OpenAI framework called Security Copilot. And that really is where I'm interested in. As a SOC manager, I'm interested in, how do I get in front of my competitors or adversaries? They're bad threat actors looking to do harm to not only my business, but the customers that operate within Microsoft. What do I do? And so having generative AI look at my standard operating procedures, looking at how, you know, casework is being done, looking at activities that we see, looking at the different types of queries and analytics being run within our engines, and having generative AI give us an output of, hey, I noticed that, you know, you have this activity by this threat actor, it has this impact, right? It could impact these customers across this spectrum. It could cause, you know, problems to this type of revenue stream, all of these kinds of things. And then say, I want to assist you in helping you be able to run, you know, your investigation. Consider these activities, consider these queries, consider this data sets that I've procured for you, you know, in timelines, and then give us visual representation and other activities. These are the types of game changers in my industry that really are going to be very impactful for blue team activities. Our adversaries, they're already using generative AI to code, to find exploits and vulnerabilities. They're trying to get into that, you know, any open door they can. And if we can have generative AI working on the opposite side of that spectrum to try and identify those areas and close those doors and be proactive and give us recommendations around that, That's really where we're looking at it from, from my perspective anyway, from a SOC management point of view.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think one of the things that's been interesting is I'm more of in a client-facing role, right? So I'm in advisory, and so as we're talking, right, and as I'm hearing everyone's comments, I'm trying to analyze it from like both perspectives, right? Like, how would I advise my customers, but also like, what are we doing internally at ThoroughPass? And I guess I'll talk a little bit about both, but initially, I would say about 2 or so months ago, we got like an AI internal policy rolled out to the company, and it was one of precaution, right? Like, let's pump the brakes, let's figure out what we can do here, and then like let's start easing up on the brake, and then maybe start hitting the gas, and what organizations or what teams within the company can leverage generative AI. So that's been, and I would say that's probably a very common approach, right? If you don't understand something, you want to take the time to understand. But like Craig said, there's also like, if you stop, that gives someone else an advantage. And it really is like moving so fast. We'll talk about this later, but even in the EU right now, there's the AI Act that they've just, that the EU Parliament has just ratified, right? And it's going to be the equivalent of the GDPR in terms of the impact it's going to have globally when it comes to lawmaking regulations affecting the use of AI and when you can't use it. So all of that to say, initially, it's that precaution, right? Taking time to understand, but also allowing the use or identifying organizations within or teams within your organization that can leverage generative AI, low risk, maybe like a marketing campaign. Hey, write these blog posts for me, versus developers, right? And how safe do you feel putting your own code into that? Or how safe do you feel like with what you're getting back? So it's been interesting because, like I said, I'm seeing it from both sides. Customers are starting to ask about it, and internally how we've been handling it.
Thank you. Ken,
Yeah,
and before you get into the generative AI, in your role with Amazon and security right now, I didn't prep you for this, so I apologize, but I'll put you on the spot anyways. But what have you seen with generative AI and how's it affected you?
yeah. So Amazon takes a kind of different approach when it comes to developing new products and services versus many other companies. They really, I would say 85% of services are developed based on just customer feedback. Or a Gen 1 will be released, and then future iterations are all based on voice of the customer and customer feedback. So what's been occurring with generative AI has been pretty interesting to watch. Because Amazon they've had AI tools, but companies started to release these generative AI tools and services, and Amazon was a little late. Well, a lot of people consider late to the party. But really what was occurring is they were taking a lot of feedback from customers before they released a product, which is Bedrock, which is the generative AI tool. And so customers are still providing feedback, and it's being iterated today. As far as my role in security, what we've been doing really is getting a lot of feedback from customers around what they would like to see from security services and how having dialogue around how it's been impacting them, so that we can understand how we can help them. So there hasn't been a lot of change other than just a lot of conversation and dialogue and learning from what I'm seeing on the AWS side. So I did also, what I'll be doing throughout this conversation is asking ChatGPT the same questions that we're discussing. So I asked for some of the top ways that generative AI has had an impact on enterprise business. And it gave 3 ways that really tie back to what everyone was saying is a lot of it comes down to being able to keep up with the competition and not want to fall behind. So the 3 ways were: number 1, enhancing creativity and innovation. Being able to quickly develop unique content and and I can come up with designs and ideas using Gen AI. The other was improving personalization in the customer experience, which is very important to most organizations. And then the third was streamlining business process automation. But then after it gave me those three, what I thought was interesting, it said it's important to note that while Gen AI has numerous benefits, you also need to consider the challenges and considerations. And so this was actually part of that response. So it talked about being sure to consider ethical concerns, data privacy, and potential biases. So it pointed those three out in that response. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
So as we talk about policy and create policy, in my experience, the first thing you want to do is start with risk. So I think that's where we'll start our conversation today, is risk. As you look at generative AI, what do you see as risks from your perspective? And how do you quantify those risks within your organization? Which I think is more difficult. So maybe we just start with what are the risks?
Well,
and we
yeah.
can talk about the latter. And Ren, do you wanna lead us out with risks that you see with generative AI?
Yeah, certainly. I think there are going to be a lot of risks between Craig and Juan Carlos and Ken that we're going to share. I think you guys will find this very interesting. From my point of view, risk comes down to how we use generative AI to protect our organization. So if I'm going to share how the sausage is made, how we defend Microsoft, and I share that with my generative AI, is that exposed? Is that potentially vulnerable to data exposure, data leakage? Is it how do I protect it? What's my risk that I'm inheriting when I start to share libraries and standard operating procedures, troubleshooting guides, services, and architectures? Because we manage to monitor over 5,000 services within Microsoft. Again, we're Microsoft's internal SOC. We handle everything across the company globally, and that's a very daunting task. So understanding what happens at a service level, understanding what happens within our cloud, within Azure, understanding what happens within, Xbox and new games, new technologies, new, different passes and things that are happening there. All kinds of opportunities there, opportunities around our product groups and products that are being developed, especially Windows and our build team, making sure that we understand where that's at. And so as we start to understand the data that is leveraged in order to protect our company, how much of that data do we expose or do we give? What controls do we put in place? Right. And then not only that, but it's also around the types of activities and things that we do with internal Microsoft to protect our customers, and what kind of a treasure trove of data might adversaries find to learn how we protect not only ourselves, but our customers that operate within there. So that's some of the top of mind when I think of risk. What keeps me up at night is what data exposed, is out there, what data exposure is out there for my threats, folks to come in and really take advantage of.
Awesome. Thank you, Juan Carlos.
Yeah, I actually read something interesting, and it was a survey that they've done. I can't remember who had done it, but they'd essentially identified that about 10% of employees using these generative AI tools were putting in confidential information, company information, right? And then a subset is 4% were putting in customer data. So there's a couple of concerns from my perspective, which is proprietary corporate information, but then also privacy concerns, right? And privacy is huge right now. It's another area that I work in with GDPR, CCPA, CPRA, right? And then every state is coming out with their own flavor, but it is a valid concern. If you're going in and you're putting customer lists, they're out there now, right? If you're going in and you're throwing in your intellectual property, it's out there, And from my perspective, those are the biggest risks. Risks to personal information, risks to proprietary corporate information, but also, if you're thinking about how you want to handle that risk, I do know that NIST just a month and a half ago or so put out their AI risk management framework, specifically tailored to managing AI risk, and it's very robust. A lot of information in there, and it's if it's something your organization is looking to is kind of grappling with how to understand that risk and how to address it, it's an excellent resource that's available. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I think that the thing to remember is generative AI is not new with GPT 3.5. And the risks are exactly what's been said. It's not that suddenly now, that was the thing. I remember when they were like, well, what's the concerns with this? So the same concerns that we have with every AI ML service that's out there is that black box, and I'm going to throw data into it, and that I don't know how long they're going to retain it for, and I don't know who's going to have access to that data. And it caused us, in the years past, that we've done like enterprise opt-outs for AI ML services in AWS, for instance, because we kept trying to flag everything with a COPA flag because that was the only way that we could try to ensure that, Amazon wasn't retaining our data. And so now everyone's like, whoa, what are the concerns? They're the same concerns that we've had for years. And so I think like that's just one of those where, yeah, the black box is a concern. Absolutely. What data is there? And one of the fun questions as we were like publishing some guidelines and policies in terms of use on this, I remember I wrote something that said like, don't put sensitive data into it, right? So whether that's proprietary information, customer information, whatever. And I was kind of challenged on one of our social communities. They're like, well, yeah, we know not to put our AWS keys in there, but like, what else is the concern? I said, well, let's kind of back this up. So it kind of goes into, I gave an example. I'm like, hey, can you build me a CloudFormation template? Cool. All right, I need this CloudFormation template to be named payroll. I needed the description to say contains account information. Cool. And then, I need it to be externally available. I needed to have this IP address, and I need to have this master cred to log into it. And before long, I had this really great, it was awesome CloudFormation template. I could have easily just deployed it and would have built everything I needed it to do. But the point is to say, look at the information that I possibly just exposed. And this was out in OpenAI. And there's some other things, we can talk about that in a little bit, but it was how much data did I reveal about our tech stack that now somebody doesn't even know it's a MySQL database, it's running this, all sorts of data. And that's not putting AWS keys in there. That's not putting customer data. I'm now telling someone about our stack. And by the way, it's externally facing, here's the IP address. So you know how to exploit MySQL, so go have at it. But I think like that was just the risks are the same that we've always had. It's just that because this thing blew up real fast, it's like, it's still the black box. It's still the same concerns, people. So, just make sure you've got some understanding about, are you okay with that? We noticed very quickly that there was huge demand for this because our CSOC was tracking numbers. And we were talking triple percentage just increase over the weeks as people were exploring this. So they were looking at it, and then we were like, okay, well, what are they using it for? What markets are they in? And it's like, they're using it for everything. And so to sit there and be like, well, don't put customer data into it. Okay, like now we're kind of, at the mercy of hoping people are doing it that way. And unfortunately, we found some cases where people were not using it the way they should. And we were, anyways, one of the other things too is one of the challenges, I think that's the risk is that when you look through the fine print, OpenAI says like, we retain your data to build our models. Like they tell you that right up front. And then I remember researching like, well, how do I opt out? And it was not an easy process. And I get it. And we were looking at it like, okay, well, if we need to opt out, how many times do we have to opt out? And then we started looking and we had like 2,300 accounts, or at least unique users that had gone out. We're like, that's a lot of opting out. And like, is there an enterprise way to opt out? And there was all these things, and they were pretty much like, no, there isn't at the moment. So, definitely open our eyes.
And it's moving so fast, that could be there now.
It could be. Now, I mean,
Maybe
just
we
full disclosure, so maybe this is for right. We are using the Azure OpenAI on for what we're doing now. And so we built our own instance because we could isolate it off and we can control the black box. There's some things with the Microsoft Azure that we had to be able to look at where there's like abuse parameters, where you could flag for if there's potential abuse. The concern that we had is it would store the prompt and the response in a separate database that it could be reviewed by Microsoft for 30 days afterwards. And so we were initially concerned, like, well, now is that potentially exposing sensitive data to Microsoft? But the lawyers were saying that that was actually worth having that control in place, because really what we need to do was front the data going into the service to make sure that it's appropriate ahead of time. So it was up to us to build the appropriate front end and say, like, no, you shouldn't be putting in all this sensitive data. So therefore we have reasonable confidence that what does, if it gets flagged for abuse, that less, information is disclosure.
Mark, I've got to step away for a minute, but I'll be right back.
Okay, no worries. Ken, thoughts from?
Yeah,
Or
so
Gen AI?
I asked ChatGPT for some different approaches to quantify risk. And one of the ones I thought was interesting, and it basically ties back into what was discussed, is it says data-driven analysis. So you need to just gather data and metrics around the usage within your organization and focus on things like data integrity, data quality, the security incidents that come up, privacy breaches, and compliance violations, and then understanding kind of what's going on in the organization and then building the controls around that. And then another thing after that was expert opinions, consultants. But I thought that, I mean, that's really where we are. Data-driven analysis. You're just gonna have to really assess what's going on with the organization with it, because it's so new. There really won't be a big enough sample size to just build controls based on the standard at this point.
Awesome. So in our audience, how many people have heard of hallucinations as it relates to generative AI? Not hallucinations like drugs, but generative AI
I don't
hallucinations.
like that word. It's more like disinformation than hallucination.
It's
Yeah.
straight up wrong a lot of the time. It makes up really great stuff.
Yes, it does.
It's amazing.
My favorite analogy is my 21-year-old son. I tell him that he's right somewhere around 54% of the time. The other 46% is suspect, because I think sometimes he just makes stuff up, but he's so confident in who he is, which is great. But also, I mean, he'll answer a question and I'll be like, I'm pretty sure that that's wrong. And he'll argue with me for a while until I've proven him completely wrong. And I feel like in my experiences with generative AI, for some things, I won't say all things, but for some things, it's that same process, right? So as we look at risk around hallucinations and generative AI being a new technology, any thoughts there from the panel?
Well, I do know, I mean, it affects everyone, even in fields that you wouldn't think. But there was about a month or so ago, an attorney who filed a motion, and the judge, right, the law clerks that work with the judge, their responsibility is to review all of the case law, ensure that it's accurate, ensure that everything is factual as stated, right? And they had to censor the attorney because a handful of cases in there were completely made up. I mean, they had the correct citation style. It had, precedent and holdings and all this information that this attorney had leveraged using generative AI. And it was, I mean, they didn't even exist. I mean, huge risk. I mean, somebody's life might be on the line at that point, somebody's liberty, right? And if you're just going in and saying, hey, draft up this motion for me, it's crazy. And so I think a lot of that risk is, I was reading about these models, and what they're made to do is provide an answer. But an answer, like you said, doesn't have to be correct. It just provides an answer. And that's where I think we're still so far removed from, and maybe they'll fix it next week, right? But that's where I think the human element still needs to come in. A lot of people are scared about their jobs and knowledge like jobs, right? But someone still has to verify that the information is correct, because it's just an input output. an output can be anything. It could be right, wrong, it'd be 40, 46, 54. It could be anything, but that is, I think, a huge risk there.
Oh, I completely agree. I think we published in conjunction with our lawyers and our privacy team, terms of use, generative AI terms of use. It was written by lawyers because at the very bottom of it said if you violate it, it says disciplinary action can lead to and including termination, which really was great because it terrified a bunch of people. But in there was a bunch of things about what you do. And one of them, absolutely, to back what Carlos said, was that it's never customer facing. We're not building a chat bot so you can interface with Liberty Mutual. And I don't want that chat bot falling in love with our customers and I'm gonna leave the emu for you kind of thing like that. But like, so part of it is that anytime that it is used, there has to be human to review it prior to it. So one of the use cases that we had was, we had people who call in, a help desk type of thing. And we've got a list of previous questions, right? Or things that have been, done through, our 15,000 call center agents. And so what we want to do is as people come in with topics, we want to be able to look at what they're asking and say, here's some other similar questions so that we can be able to, one, satisfy the claim that's being done. Like, are we asking all the right information? Someone who called in about an auto claim, these were the 15 common questions that were asked. So make sure you ask those. And so they can kind of tailor it to the policy and things. But the key on that was, we're not having this be responded right to the customer. There needs to be somebody that's reviewing it to be like, yeah, they're calling about a car. Why is it asking about a boat all of a sudden, right? So we just wanted to have that. So that was part of our terms of use, was to put some conditions around what makes sense about this. And at the moment, it is not customer facing at all. And we actually had a situation, I think Josh might know a little bit more about this, where we had was it Colombia, where we had someone build a fake WhatsApp to be our company. And they were imitating us, and we had to put a legal hold to stop it, because it was like, people think they're interfacing with us through WhatsApp. It's not us. And so that, so not so much on the hallucination side, but just on the impersonation in terms of how threat actors are going to try to take advantage of these technologies to try to gain an upper hand on trying to get information disclosure, try to get people to reveal information about their policy or their login information, and then who knows what they're going to do.
And I think another interesting topic that you'd mentioned the other night, and I hadn't thought of it until then, is as these generative AI engines are built, and companies want to find a way to monetize people utilizing that generative AI engine, right? In Google, when you do a Google search, it's pretty clear on what is paid advertising.
To promote a promoted result, yeah.
Right. In generative AI, is that going to be as clear, right? And are the results or the answer you're getting, is that a monetized
influence? Yeah.
Is that influence then?
I mean, Microsoft did say that they're looking to do promoted results. And I mean, that's out there. I mean, other than we're going to integrate it with Bing and everything. And that was the question that I had, is if you go to Google and you say, what's a good car insurance? I'm not promoting my company here, and no, I can't get you a discount, but it'll say right there on Google, it'll be like promoted result, Allstate, State Farm, Geico, you pay money to promote your results so that it's right. It's real easy for people to be like, oh, I'll just click here. I've heard of Allstate. And if you ask the same question to ChatGPT, you can ask it, what's a good, car insurance? It'll tell you, here's some characteristics. At the very bottom, it'll list off agencies. So how do I know if those are being listed? Is that promoted, right? What's causing that to be bubbled up? And so you're going to have a lot of marketing that's like, we want to be at the forefront of this. We want to be able to say that if you're asking about this product, right, how do we get that up there? And then at what point do you say, do I trust the integrity of that? Or is this really kind of going into that bias side where it's like the result is biased because it's being sponsored in the back end?
I think what's interesting.
And if you can speak up a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
What I was thinking just as we were speaking is, I think there may not be just one model like a ChatGPT which will dish out for all the questions out there, right? There might be a federation of these LLMs which will be catering to certain ad-driven or monetary aspects of it, right? Just like Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And we could say that Wikipedia is it's driven by some of the alternative motives, but it's tending, usually not, right? So that could be something which we might see, maybe not in this generation. But
Yeah. I think-
other-
I remember reading something like the advantage that Wikipedia has is that it's the same article the entire world sees. But if you type, everybody in this room types a question to Google, we'll all get different results. And so I think it's very interesting, like, you know, and I think this comes back to some of the stuff that like the EU is now requiring. They have this law that's coming out at the end of the year, that if you use any generative AI to derive a financial, that you have to what's called right to explain yourself. So you think back when you were a kid, remember you had to like show your work? Oh, I hated it. I'm like, oh, I know that's the answer, but I don't want to do the long division. And but you have to show how you derive that, because again, a lot of the EU laws, and Juan Carlos knows, is based off of discrimination. There's a lot of protections in place. So you have to prove that like this decision was not discriminatory, right? The United States has something similar where if you do anything to derive anything around a credit score, you have to show how you derive that. So you have to show your work. Well, the black box doesn't want to show you its work. Like, and MIT did, I read an article, it was like in 2019, MIT did like a study, they were doing like a kind of like a hackathon, and they asked the question like, do we need to have the black box? Like, why does it have to be so secret? Why can't we just show what's being done? And it was kind of the industry was, well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to show that. So I think it's very interesting, this idea to show like, how did you derive this? Because if you show the work, then you'd be like, wow, that got a lot of bias behind it. That's got a lot of promotion behind it, right? Am I, being fed something? So I don't know. It's these laws are going to be really interesting on where, because I just read, Schumer just introduced some laws or talked about today for the US Senate, that they're looking to do something similar on that for the United States. And it's like, oh, great. Like, what's this going to do? How is this going to impact? And when everybody the lobbyists get in there and they start trying to detangle it and start trying to find little loopholes that they can exist, it'll be interesting.
Well, and they have, I mean, even with the AI Act in the EU, one of the big, it's just, who was it? Anyway, a big tech company was lobbying for lesser regulations, less stringent controls to put in place. So I mean, it's happening. It'll happen probably to a large degree here within the US, but it is something that's of concern, right? Because even that is a manifestation outside of this like algorithm black box, a manifestation of bias that's happening. There's powerful people going in and lobbying, right, to make certain things happen. So it's everything you touch has some sort of I don't know, like dirty hands to it, right? But it is interesting. I mean, so much of this is just based on consumption of data, right? It's like, how much can you consume? How much can you take in to start giving you correct answers or more appropriate answers? There was this really cool article I read today before coming in here, and they were talking about like IoT devices. And the guy who wrote it was talking about just like the thermometer in his garage, and is like, it's set for like to check like every minute for the whole year, and through that they collect like 500 and something thousand data points on like one device. And then you have your cell phone, and then you have your Google Home, then you have your Alexa, and then you have your smart car, right, like tracking you, and all of a sudden it's just like data galore, right? And it's all used to inform, right? And so it's a big concern, right? Like, what do you do with all that data and the accuracy of it? Just because you have all the data doesn't mean you know how to use all the data and get the correct analysis going. So
I just want to interject there. Going back to the same point, and I'm coming from a technical background, I think it's interesting because I don't think, even since it's algorithm driven, I don't think anyone can even tell there is a blueprint, this is how we came to this conclusion. And therefore the point is moved. And I would be interested to know if AWS or any other organization has something around authenticity and the provenance of the generated data itself. And that would be another way to actually handle that. There are any consortium or industry-wide efforts around that to do some of that.
Or one of the features that I've noticed in the generative AI tools that I've used, specifically Google's, are the sources that they cite. Because, think back to early Google days, you get the 10 blue links, right? And nowadays, with Google Ads if you have early access, or I don't know if they turned it on publicly yet, but at least from what I've got, you make a search, you ask it for the generative AI result, and for a lot of it, it'll list 1, 2, 3 links at the end of it, and those are its sources. So whether, I mean, I know that's not all of the sources that it used to generate the model with the biases and stuff, but it is providing some sources. So back to the talk about promoted links and stuff, you might getting a little more insight into what's being paid for, if those are the sources, and you can mark those as promoted. But just to go along with that question.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking just on hallucination, BARD is like the classic example of it. Back in February, it was asked, Google's like, hey, here's our answer, right? Here's our answer. And they asked who discovered the first exoplanets. Do you remember what it said? It was the James Webb Telescope. It was like their stock dropped $100 billion because it was the wrong answer. It was a Google search would have yielded the correct answer. And so I think it's that, like, I think that because of that, Google has probably looked at that maybe as a little bit of embarrassment and been like, if we can try to get some of that, because I feel like there's gonna be, how much of this do you just blindly trust your models? I think that's the big thing is like, and I've said for years that like the models themselves might be worth more than the data itself. And so like, if my company comes up with a way that we can figure out a great way that we can underwrite, and someone walks out with that model, so it's standard intellectual property and goes to our competitor and they can underwrite us by $1 on every policy, we're done. We cease to exist. We don't make anything. We don't make cool phones. We don't make cars. So I think like just the fact of like how in your organization you should probably consider is how are you protecting those models that you're building out? Because some of the stuff that I've seen from some of our use cases around our underwriting and some of even our claims processing, if they go where they think they want to get to, it by itself could be worth more than the company itself because of what it's done and what it can do. So, but that's trusting these models and trusting and I think sometimes it's like, don't trust it the first time, don't trust it the second time, always keep pushing. Cause like, that's what I've noticed is I've pushed a bunch of stuff to it. I'm like, all right, it's looking good now, but is it, is that 100% going to still be the same way in confidence down the line?
Right. The issue I think with that is there is some aspect to it which is attribution is your second.
Yeah.
But then how do you get to be able to get to a more refined answer? You need a different set of sources.
Yes.
Not just one source.
Yeah.
How do you attribute in that case? It becomes harder and harder when you actually get to that kind of.
Yeah, great point.
And I think 3 weeks ago in front of Congress, I had a couple of quick points. When OpenAI's CEO was talking in front of Congress, him and there were 2 others, I forget who they were, on speaking to Congress at the same time. And Congress said, how much should we regulate? And they said, just regulate us, give us something, right? We want something to hold us to. And I've never heard industry ask the government for regulation. So that's one point. And at that same time that was happening, OpenAI actually open sourced their testing models, which I think is you look at large language models that are released, what we want to understand that is that black box and how are they tested? How do we know that they're valid? And how do we know that they're accurate and that they're safe, right, before they're released? And so I think as that gets open sourced and people understand how they're tested, I think that can provide something.
So I work for an organization that for years has relied on traditional AI in order to understand things that were elusive. And even in that environment, we've had to treat what we get out of that work with a degree of skepticism that has to prove itself. I've worked in a call center environment and some people just lie. And I've worked in a variety of scenarios where people give bad information. And part of me is wondering why suddenly this source of information is being given so much respect and credibility as being accurate when it's so new and so emerging. I feel like everybody needs to get a little slap in the face and say, now, hold on. This is emerging technology. You're putting too much trust in it. And everybody's acting like there's just some new threat to the world. And it's just another bad source of information that I think will improve. And I think will get amazing. But until then, we just get a really healthy dose of skepticism. And we just have lost that. The general public has lost it. So they're demanding, that poor attorney, right? That's the example you gave, or the teacher who at a university asked ChatGPT to evaluate the students' papers to see if it created any of them, and it said I created all of them, And the trouble that ensued is she, fails the class and people don't graduate and all the trouble. Anyways, but people are trusting this way more than they should, given where it is in its, sorry to use a Gartner term, it's in its hype cycle.
Yeah.
It's way too early to be trusting this, yet people do. And I think that's what's driving some of the legislation. That's what's driving the demand for regulations, is people just have unrealistic expectations about how accurate this is.
Well, you have to go like, woo, I mean, people are just saying this is the downfall of Western civilization. I mean, you got people that are like, this is Skynet, right? I welcome our new robot overlords, and they're like, it's over. And then you've got, you have to have that balance. I think that's been the key for us is when this all started coming out, they were like, well, what's our stance? And I'm like, well, we can try to block it, but like, let's just look at that Herculean effort behind that, because it's not just OpenAI, it's every other third-party SaaS vendor that's all going to be hooking into that as well. So like, be clear here, you're not going to remove it completely from your ecosystem. Or two, you just turn away and say, have at it, folks, we have no concerns whatsoever. That's just irresponsible. And so what we've had to do is try to find something in the middle, because you're right. I look at this and be like, yeah, it hasn't proven itself. It's got the capabilities and promise to do certain things, but then people over there going like, but our competitors use it. We have to use it. We have to use it. And it's like, okay, slow down. Like, let's, and it was great. We were like, you have to submit use cases. And it was funny. I had this one team that was just like, we want to use this. And when I'm like, okay, well, let's submit your use cases up to this board, they weren't even there. And I was like, was this just more like you were just like, it was a hype cycle thing? We're going to throw things against the wall and hope it sticks. And therefore, like, that's the use case for it. Because that's how sometimes emerging tech has been with us. It's like, oh my gosh, blockchain, we need to build something around blockchain. So we build something around blockchain, and then we're searching for a problem for it to solve. And so like when we actually pushed on what are legitimate business use cases, there were few, but it was nowhere near the hype back in February when they're like, I need this now. But you bring up great points. I think like, we all need to make sure and like stand back and like, just what it is. It's just a big adding machine of just connecting things together.
Yeah. Well, many of us have cars with like Copilot, right? Do we just like take a nap?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But some people did, and that's caused deaths, right? And so at some point you just have to say, please don't treat this as fully baked, done, and ready.
No, I was just gonna say, I've been having conversations with my teenage daughter about not believing everything she sees on TikTok.
What?
It's like, I'm sure I'm not the only one having a conversation with someone, or for the last 30 years, I was telling, making jokes about people believing everything they see on the internet.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar,
Yeah.
but the challenge, the concern and the scary thing is that now, like even for me, I've been fooled. There was a video maybe a few months ago with Steph Curry shooting shots from the other end of the court, and he was just draining them all. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, it's not real. But it's just, I'm like, but it is real. No, it can't be
Steph
real.
Curry can't do that.
Yeah, he can't do that. But I'm listening, and the audio and everything is just so lined up. And I see the ball, it doesn't go out of the view. I'm like, well, okay, it was real. And it finally convinced me after watching it 15 times, and then it turns out it wasn't. So I'm like, you can't even believe what you see and hear anymore.
It depends, though. I think going back to why people are up in arms, or that could be that I was reading up or getting to some videos. Anyways, I don't know how much true it is, but they said Einstein's IQ was 165 and ChatGPT 4's IQ is 170. That's the cost what it said.
Well, they've had it like get admitted in like it was taking college entrance exams. I mean, it was like
Pass like the bar.
yeah, pass the bar. Yeah, how does that make you feel as a lawyer?
I'm like, hey, I can be replaced.
Yeah, no, you have a comment.
And I think the difficulty is if I think about where technology's gone over the years, I remember getting my first like GPS unit, right, back when they were standalone devices you put in cars. Right, we called ours Pam, and because it was mapped backwards, and we thought that was cute. But we had Pam that she led us everywhere in California, and then it was on my phone, right? And so we transferred Pam, and now Pam's my phone, and we utilized Pam and got us everywhere we needed to go. Until one time, I was in California, and I forget which bridge it is, but we went back and forth across that same bridge 4 times before
Oh,
we
no.
finally broke the loop. It was like 3 in the morning. I'd run a Ragnar and I was driving, and Google just, it took us one way on the bridge and it's like, exit, turn right. And we went the other way on the bridge. I did that 3 times
The toll
before
people were.
I'm like, forget Google, I gotta look at the signs, right? And I think that's the difficulty with generative AI right now, is it's answering enough things correctly and getting us where we wanna go, that you believe it. And even though it may only be right 54% of the time, it's trusting enough that it answers with confidence, so it feels
Yeah,
okay.
it's- what is it, pre 2021? Because if you were to ask it who the CEO of Josh and I's company is, it'll give you the wrong answer, because we changed over last year. So it's kind of like, all right, I can trust it up to a certain point, but like, yeah, I think there's a lot of this is really just the lessons on this is like, just slow down. I think to your point.
One of the questions I had, you guys are talking about policies and things like that.
Yeah.
On
And
the
we're
compliance-
coming back around to policies in just a second,
Well,
so.
maybe I'm jumping again.
No, no.
But like on the compliance side, and we've all talked about, don't trust it, don't do this. Are you guys, we have our end users go through all this cybersecurity training on phishing, everything else. Have you guys started training your end users and consistently doing that, or looking at it, or is it just, hey, here's our policy, do this?
No, yeah, we actually built a user guide, and that was actually part of our policy creation and so from a cyber perspective, it was nice to have a seat at the table. I think that's probably one of the takeaways that I would say is that like, this policy wasn't written by lawyers. It wasn't just written by our privacy team, which is also made up of lawyers. It was that cyber was out there, and there was also app development was at it. And I remember one of the policies that we had kind of put in there was like, okay, well, we got to train users on how to do this right. Like, what happens when, an offensive response comes back or something like this? Like, so we've got a little way that they can engage with our corporate compliance team to be able to engage, like, yeah, I was working with it and something weird happened. And so then we've got, hopefully that people will find that. So we have a user guide. And then,
But that's in your guys' AI. What about,
Yeah.
like, you guys talk about all those third parties in your vendors?
oh no, that one's,
That are, because that's ever changing.
well, it's like the 4th party problem, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, I've got a 3rd-party relationship that I'm now sending data to, and now they're like, we've got this new plugin, and you hope they're using like that Whisper extension so that it's like, it's a private instance at least. But like, and they're putting these features in there and they're not telling us. So like, how as part of your 3rd-party due diligence, you actually go back and evaluate whether or not that, and then it's also like, well, what data do they have? Yeah, I think that one has been the challenge. I think what we found was interesting is we had like this period where we had like a coaching page set up. So when people would hit OpenAI, it would say, hey, click on this for some information. So we were trying every 15 minutes, we like, hey, go over here and make sure you're okay with this. Don't use classified information, things like that. And then we blocked it. Then the decision came down, I think it was the Samsung leak. What was that, like April of this year, where they were like, yeah, we disclosed a lot of information that we didn't want to have out there. And so our leadership just said, we're blocking it. Hard block, which unfortunately, Azure's documentation for their OpenAI is on OpenAI. So we totally cut ourselves off from all of their documentation. So that was kind of a little fun lesson learned. But when we blocked it, it was on May 1st. And then about 10 days later, the CSOC got me a report, and there was like 70 websites that people were trying to hit to that had chat or GPT in the name of it. We're like, oh man, this is an absolute disaster, because like, I don't want someone going to chatgpt.com. That's not ChatGPT, right? You think about all the different copycats that would be out there. In fact, we called our instance.
Craig, sorry to
Oh,
cut you off,
sorry.
if we can step back, because you're getting into controls a little bit.
Oh, sorry, am I
Yeah,
stepping in the
come
control space already?
Yeah.
Oh, I went from
you're
policy
accelerating.
compliance into that, so that's what
So,
happens.
Let's
Oh, sorry.
step back into policy and creating
Oh,
policy.
yeah, so we
if
created a
that's all right.
policy, and I think I gave you a link on that one where you found it. We based our policy off of there was a Microsoft ethical policy that was out. So I'd say if you don't know where to start, that's a great place to start. That was one that we were able to take and bring, like I said, so cyber was at the table. And one of the things that we put in there was I was able to say like, hey, if you're gonna generate code, make sure you scan that code. I just wanna make sure there's no vulnerability. So I was at least able to try to influence that. And then the lawyers had all their stuff about if you do this, then we'll fire you. So, but anyways, I'm sorry, I'm not even sure if I answered your question. I went down some roads. I went to a dark
That's all right.
place. I'm sorry. I hallucinated. So
Wasn't host hallucinations,
Yeah.
all good information,
Yeah.
just went really fast.
The accuracy was pretty good, but yeah.
So if again, Ren had to step away for a minute and came back,
Oh,
but as it, in Microsoft world, as you guys have put together policies, any thoughts, tips, tricks?
Yeah, no, on the OpenAI stuff, to Craig's benefit, right? We've got a pretty extensive library of policies, tips and tricks. And the thing that, Mark, you and I were talking about this earlier, and I'd love to see, Juan Carlos, Craig, if you guys agree. And I think we've alluded to this a little bit, but the policies that you're going to build, think about generative AI as any other platform, any other service within your organization. It should follow identity access management policies and controls, right? It should follow zero trust from networking and access and all of those things. Like the things that you normally would do for any revenue generating application, you're going to do for your generative AI. Right. These are the tips and tricks that you're going to want to follow, the policies. And so just be mindful that the way that you're going to use the platform meets the policy and adheres to the type of regulations and data controls and things that you want to put in place. Like Craig was talking about, hey, we built a user guide. That's fantastic. One of the other things Mark and I were talking about is, having policies in place that notify, that make your users aware, right? Sometimes policies are put into place and then even the user isn't quite aware of what that policy can or can't do, or what it limits them to within the application or the service that they're leveraging. Keeping those things in mind, I think, will go a long way with the way generative AI will be used, and hopefully will add the type of impact that we're all looking for.
Yeah, I'd say it'll require some like pivoting, like practical, I guess, advice here would be same thing, right? Is policies, procedures, but there's going to be a training component. So just like you have security awareness training, just like you have privacy training, you're probably going to want to have some training related to like general AI use within your organization, but also specific AI use for like developers, right? And then other things like risk management, third-party risk. You send out those due diligence questionnaires and they're a pain, but if it's a real concern right now, then what's stopping you from making them more robust? Are you using any AI generative like tools?
Yeah, is it the same tenant? That was the one that we were looking at, was like, they're like, we've got it. Like, are we using the same tenant as all of your other customers?
Yeah.
Like, because I would be a little bit concerned about that, right? I remember we asked the company that and they were like, well, no, it's the same tenant. We're like, no, we don't want to use this. Like, we want some isolation, because if we're going to be submitting some certain things out there, I would like that not to, even though you've got a private instance of it, it's kind of like, let's all use the same encryption key. Cool, there's not a lot of value on that one. So, all right, there we go.
But it is, but right, but like you get to ask the questions that you want to ask that are important to your organization, and that can help you make a decision whether you want to engage with a third party or not, right? The same way when I was doing vendor risk management in a previous life, it'd say, what security certifications do you have? And they're like, none. And we're like, all right, good luck. It's the same concept, right? I can't remember who said it, but you're treating this, you're treating this the same way, right? That you would any other like system, any other software, any other tool you're using. And you're just kind of broadening the scope to encompass AI now.
Well, and I like that one, Carlos, because, when, let's say you're setting up generative AI for a human resources organization, right? Versus a sales organization versus a development organization. Each of those organizations are going to leverage the platform just a little differently. And the limitations and policies that you put in place, protect the data, to protect the usage, are going to be slightly different, right? Especially if you're building policies around how the modules are built and how the modules are then incorporated back into the generative AI platform. Each of those things are considered slightly nuanced only because of the organization. But as a whole, you're looking at it from a top down, you're looking at it from a holistic view, and then you narrow that focus for that individual organization and the use.
Yeah, and that kind of goes like, compliance shouldn't be like this siloed off function, right? It should be embedded within the entire organization and having conversations with the entire organization. And ensuring, right, like, hey, HR, are you using this tool, right? What about you, sales? And determining if it's being used, to what degree it's being used, and then evaluating from there.
So if I'm an organization, I have my standard security policies, right? I'm SOC 2, I'm ISO. Generative AI is now new. It's scary. From your perspective, Juan Carlos, one new policy, or do you weave generative AI or AI in general through your existing policies? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that you'll probably get a lot of questions about AI specifically, right? And so it probably warrants having its own documentation. Because you don't want to send somebody to 4 or 5 different policies to look for a section within and like kind of have to like pluck all the information and make a determination on their own. If it's big enough, like if it's a big enough issue, I think you've got to address it head on, create the documentation, and then just send everyone to that single piece. Now, what you want to do is make sure that if you are leveraging, right, like bits and pieces from other policies, that they're all aligned. But I would say you want to have your AI acceptable use policy or whatever you want to call it. I think that's the way to go here.
Okay. Awesome. And say one of the things that we did is I think it's like an act of Congress can get passed faster than changing some of our standards. And I'm not joking. It's just that one of the things that we did is, as an architect, we have a thing called an ADR, an architectural decision record. And so one of the first things that when they were like, what is our stance from cyber, is that's what I published. So I drafted it, reviewed it with a lot of applicable parties, and we published it. And at the time, it was basically like, you cannot use company information at the moment. If you want to use public information to explore, experiment, fine, but you cannot use company information. And part of this ADR had like options considered. What were some of the concerns, right? What's the history, the background? So it was all out there, and it lines in with applicable standards that we had within the company. And then we've since updated that as more policies have come out, that we make sure that those are aligned. But when they're like, publish something, it's like, okay, here's our concerns. This is why it is, and this is why we're making the stand. So at least there was something that was out there.
And I think with any good governance function within your organization, you should, I mean, you get to the like row part, right, where it's like, all right, we're evaluating our policies on an annual basis, right? But with something like this, you have the opportunity to visit it frequently to make sure that you are keeping up with developments, right? And that you are broadening the scope and allowing more parties to use it so that it can be leveraged appropriately. But yeah, I mean, you got to put something out first and then say, hey, but you know, give us time. We'll be evaluating this continuously and making changes.
I'm just curious, quickly, from just to lighten up the GRC load, have you played around or considered using engineering solution like anonymizing the critical pieces of data or tokenizing the data before feeding to the LLMs?
So we're looking at another, sorry, I was trying to follow, what other types of?
So he's saying, as you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but just so that everybody can online can hear as well. When have you considered anonymizing the data?
Oh.
So capturing the data as it goes to the LLM.
De-identifying and anonymizing. Yeah, and so that was some of the things that we had on it. Was a part of it was like, the first ADR that I wrote was, you cannot use company data. And that didn't mean, again, if you de-identify it, anonymize it, we can have a 30-minute discussion about, is there such thing as de-identified anonymized data? Because we can have a great philosophical discussion about that by itself. But yeah, I think at that point, if you remove enough of the attributes, we were not concerned, because again, it's like, I can throw an address out there and it's not going to mean anything, but as soon as I put qualifying information, now I've revealed something. So
I think it's, in our organization, it's easier to get a policy approved than it is to get a data scientist to reuse.
Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, because I mean, we've challenged, like I said, this wasn't a new issue. Like our Office of Data Science came to security a number of years ago, real quick side tangent, I promise. And they were like, hey, we want to build in these tools. And we're like, okay, what are your requirements? They're like, we want large amounts of production data that's very sensitive. We're like, okay, you know, and then they're like, and we want access to the internet. and we want the ability to install any plugins from like RevR or anything, you know, R Studio. And they're like, can you secure that? And no, like, it was like, I can give you 15 reasons for each one of these, but to your point, like, it is a challenge, because if we were to say, use public data, they don't want to use public data sets, because at a certain point, they want to actually test things out. And so that's why but yeah, we did have some discussion on that. Yeah.
All right, Ken, thoughts from,
What does
Yeah.
ChatGPT say?
The panelists are smarter than ChatGPT. Everything, yeah, everything was covered, that ChatGPT, mentioned. I asked ChatGPT how policy can be leveraged for proper use of generative AI, and I mean, you guys touched on all of it.
awesome. So one thing that we didn't talk about in risk, but I think it has to do with policy as well. And when I started playing around with generative AI models and doing research, so in my role at Amazon, we sell services to different state agencies, and I'm familiar with the state of Utah. And so I said, oh, it'll be a fun practice. I'll go through and do some research and see what it spits out. So I started some research and was doing it with Bard because of the older models that have been trained in OpenAI, right? So I started in Bard, and then I also opened up Edge and the new chat feature. And I would put in there, like, what are bills associated with the state of Utah that associate to computing or cloud computing that I should know about? And it brought up a couple of bills, and one of them was correct. And then I asked to one specific instance, I'll just cut to that really quick, was who's the CISO for the state of Utah? And it's one specific person, and it listed both Bard as well as chat within Edge brought up the incorrect person. And then
The same person?
it was different people.
Oh, okay.
Each
That would have been really
Right,
interesting.
but it was incorrect. One was one that was older, and one was just a name I didn't even recognize, which might have had an affiliation with the state of some time, but did not. And then I typed back in Bard specifically, I thought the CISO for the state of Utah is Phil Bates. That's the actual CISO for the state of Utah. And it said, oh yes, it is Phil Bates. And here's some things that he's done, of which one of those was correct that I knew of. The others, I couldn't attribute him in a Google search. And that's where a question comes up as we talk about risk. If we have bad actors right now that know that we're relying on generative AI, if you will, following my maps analogy, to get somewhere, how much bad information are bad actors filling these LLMs right now, right? And are they just,
right?
yeah, and building up a bias? And
Yeah.
how do you protect against that?
Yeah, I just kind of started dumping dummy bad data out there, right? Yeah, to kind of mess with them all. I don't know, there's, you know, we found, like, I think recorded future is what we use for some of our dark web analysis. And when that kind of opened up back in February, when the world was imploding, I'm not sure if you ever recorded future, and they had this really great publication they published, and it was showing how they were using it to develop malware. And it was fantastic on how they were finding the dark web. They're like, we're going to trick ChatGPT. It's like, write me a SQL injection. At the very beginning, it'd be like, okay, sure, here's how to write a SQL injection. And then they're like, oh no, we don't want that. That's bad. So, but then if you took the CVE, the CVSS like description, and fed it into it, it would actually then make the malware for you. And it was really fascinating as people kept trying to like circumvent around it. It's like the adversaries are using this too, to the points that have been illustrated here. It's like, you know, as much of it's like, how can your business benefit from it? But how much do we have to be better on the defensive side? There was a great video I watched of how someone used ChatGPT to get a bug bounty. It was like the first bug bounty it collected was like $600, and it figured out how to override an install of a company's EDR. I don't know if it was CrowdStrike or whatever it was, it didn't say. But I was like, wow, and this person had no coding ability. They had a 20-minute video they were showing going back and forth, and they were able to find a bug, and they submitted and got some money out of it. But it's like, this is being used in a lot of ways that I'm like, I don't think it was originally intended that way. And I think that's always the challenge, right? It's like, what is the Rugged Manifesto says? It's like, recognize your code will be used in ways you never intended it to be. I think that's what's happening with generative AI. It's not just a chatbot. Like some of our executives, they're like, oh, it's just the new Google. It's the new chatbot. It's like, no, it's more than that. Like, you know, Google wasn't building malicious code, you know, on just a couple of questions that therefore could be used and exploited against my company.
Yeah, it's a space race all over again. And when I say space race, I'm saying here you have corporate entities that are trying to work within generative AI to drive the right behavior. And then you have public entities and influencers in social media and threat adversaries that are driving the wrong behaviors. And the two will clash at some point, right? They will come to a head. And it will be very, very interesting to see, because a lot of the models right now are being built on public domain, public data, right? And not being able to leverage corporate data because of some of the policies and controls and concerns that we've all expressed here today. And where does that convergence happen? Where does it, and what will be the result of that convergence? Because it's coming.
So we talked a lot about policies. We talked a little bit about controls. Sorry. No, that's all right. So as we look at controls to implement, to enforce policy, any thoughts there? Come on, Juan Carlos, you're a policy guy. I'm kidding.
No, good. I'll let somebody else go while I think through this one. Oh, yeah.
I like what he said. That was one I was thinking of, is anonymize the data, right? Put in replacements for information that you want protected. And, if it's a noun, it can be replaced by a number or something that's completely anonymized. Other than that too is, do control large language models, right? Use data that has been created from sources that you want to use. Don't open it up to, hey, what does the ethos say I should do about something, but say based on these types of records, bring in NIST, bring in certain policies and things to create what your policies might want to be, and say using these as records, and based on how we want to use it, then give me a model. Put some parameters around what it is. It's kind of like coding, right? You got to use parameters, input, sanitization for parameters. The same thing's going to be with what goes into our models that we're detecting from.
And it's been proven that actually, not only on the safety side of things, but it provides more accurate information. There was reading about people using it to summarize books, and when you ask questions about the books, it gives you false answers about it. But if you then take that book, it's a very defined, set of content that you can vectorize, and then if you train a model specifically on that data set and ask questions, that's much more accurate than just asking a chatbot about it, because it'll provide hallucinations and stuff.
Yeah.
The vectorized stuff won't.
I'd say controls. I was thinking one of the ones that's come up recently is, so we tried to, it's tough because we're a very large organization, not as big as some of like Microsoft, obviously, but we kind of built this GPT instance where we're like, this is approved. And then just this last week, it's, well, we have a use case and we want to try the Vertex AI in Google Cloud. And it's like, oh, like, but we don't, like, what is that? And I think like that's one of the things, like for us, it's trying to control, as much as I was saying, like the Herculean effort to like stop it, but it's also like, I can go out to SageMaker Studio and grab the Hugging Face interface that links into the marketplace, and I can have it all right there too. And so for a lot of it is just trying to understand, like, there's gonna be a lot of use cases where there's gonna be opportunities to use this. So you're gonna have to look at like, how can I prevent this, right? So in the case of like anonymized data, or there's certain data sets, like I've said for years, like you should never report on social security number. Like, I'm sorry, there are certain elements that should never belong in a reporting environment, like bank account information. Are you looking for some trend that people with a 6th and their 4th position born in the month of February have a greater tendency to get accidents in the month of February? Like, I to the point where it's like, there's certain data that shouldn't be out there. So, but you can't try to detect it on the back end. So you would try to build a preventative control in the front. So what we did, at least for ours, was we have a front interface of an internal thing that we call Cortex, that we can try to get a better understanding of like, what data are you putting in here, so that we're less likely to worry about what was put into it was bad, right? Or we regret that. So I would say one of the controls that we did was try to prevent or understand what's going in there. Now, the challenge on that is we want to use Vertex AI and Hugging Face, and how do I then have a consistent control plane across those? That's kind of the challenge that we've been looking at. So, so I would say, within an organization, what are ways you can prevent? And then there's, in those you can't, try to at least detect. right? And if it's anything, it's like, I've told this to friends who are like, oh, it's not being used at my company. Oh, it is. Go look at your firewall logs. It's being heavily used.
Mhm.
And so at least if you got that, you can look at your firewall logs and have an idea. If you got the capability of putting a coaching page in front, awesome. Put something out there. What we did is when we blocked it, we just didn't like just, you get 404. We put a page that said, this is not allowed. And by the way, here's how you request access to the approved one. Here's our policy. So try to get that information out to the users. Of what we kind of found is that some people probably felt like, hey, I'm using it to summarize this email or to build a PowerPoint presentation or whatever. That's not an approved use because they read this very scary document about terms of use. And we were like, no, you can still use that over here. We want you to do that. Because at that point, then people are getting scared. And that's when we started noticing about 70 sites where people are trying to find other ways to get that information. And we're like, oh no. And that was like, make sure it's fully built before you start blocking. And we thought we had it fully built, but apparently some people were a little scared. So.
And one of the questions that I have as we get to controls is to block or not to block.
Yeah.
Because you do block and people are gonna find other avenues. And so how do you handle that, right? Is it a blocking question or not a blocking question?
So as I was thinking through everyone's comments, I would say from a controls perspective, non-technical, right? You have your policies, you have your training, but then there's other practical things you can do, which something would be like, if you're working with an ISO 27001, you have your information security management system, and then you have your security committee, right? And then there's your privacy and security steering committees. And then it can be privacy and security and AI steering committees, right? Where all use cases or exceptions are brought, and then you grant exceptions through those, right? Because then you bring in relevant stakeholders, you can talk through the actual problems, identified or non-identified possible effects of use of certain technology. So that's from a non-technical control perspective. To get to whether it should be an outright ban or not, I once went to an event and it was the chief legal officer of Starbucks. And I started my career at working at Honda, and she used to be the chief legal officer at Honda. And back when she first started, there's like she was like the one person, and she kind of built out the whole function. But she said that when she first joined, everyone was so scared to talk to legal because you all probably know it's always like the no, right? That's where you go to get your no. And what she wanted was to create a culture, especially like in automobile manufacturing, you need to have innovation, right? You need to be able to grow. And so she started building out her legal team, and she gave them one instruction, and the instruction was, if you think it's a no, find a creative way to say yes, right? So like always say yes, but within the confines of the law. And this applies to like a legal perspective, but the same concept could apply to the use of AI, which is, what's the point of the outright ban, right? Like it could be like, hey, outright ban for like 1 week while we figure this out, and then we'll start like, getting use cases out, or bring your use cases to us, we'll evaluate and we'll move forward. Because that's, to some degree, I think people are right. If you aren't using the technology, you might be left behind, but it's working with people. It's not coming down with the hammer and saying no, it's creative solutions to saying yes. Okay, you can't use it for this, but like, could you leverage it this way? Oh, great, we got to the same end result, but a different route. And so I think that would be my approach, is find a creative way to say yes, right? And I think this is the whole point of it. It's the creativity that's gotten us into this mess or having this discussion. But yeah, I would say outright ban maybe while you're initially evaluating, but you're gonna have to move quick, and you have to meet with stakeholders, you have to hear ideas, and you're gonna have to be open to them.
Bryn, thoughts?
I love, Juan Carlos, what you're saying. I think that's spot on. Finding a creative way to say yes. I think that's brilliant. I was kind of thinking through an idea that we're tossing around. I would certainly love to hear, Craig and Juan and Ken and others, your guys' opinion. One of the things that we're playing with within generative AI is asking, as we look for output and as we try to drive the right controls around our data models, is this an opinion response or is this a factual response? To help drive the right control, not only a couple of thoughts here is if we can teach the users to ask that, to trust but verify, and we can teach the model to understand, you know, what's happening around hallucinations and around other outputs to help control. And because when I think controls, I think of, yeah, I want to put policies and controls in place, but I also want to put those controls in a way that allows the technology to interact with the users and give them a good, you know, positive experience. And so that creative way to get to a yes. And so as you were talking, my mind was like, okay, well, you know, we're playing around with this idea of, is it an opinion response? Is this a factual response? Is there more to this? Can you elaborate? And really help drive the right type of education, not only from our users, but from the models as it outputs data back to us from that point of view. So that's kind of where my mind's at right now, based on what the discussion is doing. I love it. It's great.
So ChatGPT's response to what types of controls should be used to enforce policy. The top ones were, number one was access controls. So role-based access based on a user's need or their role in an organization and need to use generative AI. The other was data governance, and a lot of what you said related to what type of data, how the data is collected, where it's stored, how it's used for generative AI, and then how it's handled. And then the other was the incident response. And so, you know, make sure that you have a good solution in place to monitor so you can respond when issues come up.
And I think as we look at controls, that things that I've picked out as we talk today is, first off, make sure you have a good solution where you can monitor where people go and what they're doing, because I think that's going to educate you as to what you need to do to implement controls, but also where you need to build your policy. Because if it is a lot of fourth party solutions that they're going to, you need to know it, right? And you need to start thinking through how to control it, right? We've got a number, we haven't talked a whole lot of code, but a lot of IDEs now have integrations with Google, right?
Yeah, Copilot.
With Copilot, right, on the AWS side. Code Whisperer, thank you. Name slipped my mind. Yep. So there are just your IDEs and implementing those. That's another thing that you have to protect. So start with firewalls. From firewalls, getting to the point where we're de-anonymizing data. I think that's a promised land of where you can get.
Yeah, like I said, we could have a whole discussion in a couple months just on that. I would love, because I like I said, feels like on paper you can de-identify, but I'll be quiet.
I tried to do it for a staging environment once to de-anonymize data, and it was one of those projects that kept starting and stopping and starting and stopping because it was way more.
Yeah, and the tokenization is one of the ones that you can use too as well, right? You can say at this point that data is tokenized, so therefore you can use it, right? But like, yeah, I would trust tokenization far more than anything about de-identifying, because honestly, it's if you know what you're doing, you can get it back to what you want to.
Yeah, exactly. So from the group, any other thoughts, questions, discussion topics?
So, not as effective as actually tokenizing data. It's not as effective as that. If we can do that, that's what we prefer. But what we have been effective at doing is taking those sensitive data elements and encrypting them in their sources. And then we get to control who gets access through that broker to that data, and we use that as a monitoring point to understand what those tools are that are using the data, if that makes sense. So it's not perfect, because people like to broker data to their friends, and all kinds of crazy stuff happens. It's just real, but it's not as effective as tokenizing data or otherwise managing data, but it has helped. And you didn't mention it this time around, but earlier you mentioned training. So policy and training, detection, all these things working together, I think we're not a train wreck, but we're still having issues. I don't know how else to say it.
I think everybody's in the same boat. This is new, it's crazy, it's a wild ride.
We do have one thing, so just with code generation, real quick. Copilot, there is a Copilot, there is some litigation against it right now. And so our lawyers are very nervous about it, because, as Juan Carlos said, there's not a lot of legal precedents that's currently going on. The closest was the Sun Microsystems suing Google over some code that's in Android. By the way, they favored Google on that one, not even on Sun, which would have at least set some precedents around like borrowed code and what does that mean? And so there was some litigation that was going on with image generation, and they were stealing images from Shutterfly, and the judge on that one came in and said, yep, because these images had the Shutterfly watermark on it, we're gonna cease this application from running until you can remove that code from that. So one of the conversations I had with one of our lawyers was we have to be very careful, because if something does come down the line, right, all these different licenses that are out there, and that they say, yep, this was generated and violated this license. So any application that took code, that now has to cease until you can remove that information out of it. So suddenly we said like, well, if that code gets into our underwriting app, do we just stop underwriting? Like, I mean, that's huge. We can't process claims. So just a word of kind of caution until some of the legal stuff. We've been very hesitant on the Copilot stuff.
Well, to that point, there are, what was the logging, Log4j vulnerability, and
Okay.
so, if we have tools that can scan our code for vulnerabilities, then we should be able to have tools that can scan for code that was.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
even if you get it from a Gen AI code tool, I see your point, you could be getting unwittingly code that has.
Copyrighted,
Right.
yeah.
Copyright stuff, so there should be tools, at least maybe that's a new opportunity, is to scan for stuff that's not just vulnerabilities, but copyrighted and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's like you can do like the dependabot stuff, right? If you're using GitHub Actions and stuff like that, that can say like, where's those dependent libraries and make sure those are
Right.
hitting certain, sorts. But it was just one of those things that was like, there's not a lot of precedence. And so again, like when people get nervous, they go like this. And it was just because of the Shutterfly case that we were like, oh, wait, that could shut this down. We're like, all right. And so what we put, at least within our policy, was if you're gonna generate, make sure it's scanned. At least, for me, I was more nervous about vulnerabilities being introduced to my environment from generated code. The lawyers obviously are looking at it from like, is this violating some license or copyrighted code that's there?
You just brought up an issue that opened up the heavens for me on this one for just a moment, but we spend a lot of energy reviewing open source licensing and making sure that, that we don't incorporate libraries that would give us problems like this. Is there a license that's somewhat standardized there that we can point to in the same way we look at standard open source type licensing? Is there a standardized license, or could we require there be some sort of standardized license when an organization is going to keep the data? Is that a way of maybe hooking this? I don't know. I've never thought of it until you said what you said.
Is it like Napster? I was just playing the music, like someone else loaded it in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, it's a great point, because a lot of the open source ones, like, there's like a couple standard ones, but like, I remember looking at one open source license, and it was like, if you use our product, you have to put our logo on your front page.
Which is why we are very careful about.
Exactly, so we were like, not a chance, we're gonna, one, as a security, I don't want to broadcast that I'm using it, right, because therefore, hey, a Log4j vulnerability, I mean, we were using Log4j for so long. I would love, so we were heavily hit on that one. We also benefited from like, I think it was like remember Heartbleed? Remember that one, the open SSH vulnerability? We were like 93% compliance on that. Why? Because we never updated open SSH in like the previous 2 years. So we were like, hey, we're good to go on that one. But no, I think that there is an opportunity on this, and maybe that might come out of this, where it's like, I can't use these code generated tools because there's so much concern, but if there's some license that can come out that
we
can,
could key off of.
Yeah, you can be like,
We've
do you
got
hit
tools in the
this?
Pipeline, they're analyzing.
Yeah.
And if there's something like that, like a
Yeah.
standard license format or something that our SCA tools could use.
Yeah.
To identify it, that would begin to automate this.
Yeah.
But again, it's nothing super new, except for scale, because code has been shared on Stack Overflow and all these.
Absolutely,
for
yeah.
Years and years, it's just now we're going to these Gen AI tools for it instead, and those won't always tell you what license to get, probably will never
Yeah.
tell you what license.
And it also depends on your company. Like we get the ones that are the licensed ones that buy like Corel Draw or Corel something, and they buy the license for it, and they come back and say, we know there's one person at your company that's using this product, so you need to pay up this number of license because it's a violation because we own it. So we get the license hunters that will like target our company because they bought up some old thing and someone's like, I really like Corel Draw or what, I think WordPerfect went over there, right? So yeah, I think you'll have these ones that they're actively looking at like violations of licenses within certain things, but I don't know. I just know that our lawyers, the one that I work with particularly, he's like, that's been his worrisome point. He's like, we still are going to use this. There's a lot of open source licenses. Doesn't mean we shouldn't, but there's this pending litigation. It's Copilot litigation. You go on .com, I think is literally the name of it. And it's out there and it's like, ooh, and they're using the whole like discriminate, like if you read through the litigations, they're pretty interesting. They're kind of like saying it's like, oh, it should be open for all. And it's very interesting. So, but because of that, we've never turned on GitHub Copilot. So we're like, nope, sorry. But maybe you can bring that back to Amazon and say, hey, for our products here, if we can integrate some of these features into, Code Whisperer to be like, this is how we prove the licensing by where we're deriving the code. That puts that in a better position for larger organizations that don't need to necessarily worry about, am I going to violate something that therefore I then have to shut down in the future? So even that attribution by itself might be a good thing.
Do you think it could be a point to be moved from a legal standpoint that you're sourcing in from different sources and digesting the information and spitting it out the other end, and therefore the attribution doesn't matter? You can attribute the new license to the new code generated instead of where it's coming from because you processed it.
I think a question that I would have from a legal perspective at some point, if Microsoft or Amazon, if they own the generative engine that creates that code, do they have ownership of it?
Yeah. Well, because it's kind of like, it's kind of that whole argument around like legal precedence of like the possession of the photo, therefore is the one who owns it. And most people are like, Facebook owns your photo because you upload it to it. You're actually consenting over your rights to it. Obviously, they've never sued anybody on it, but I think there's some legal, this is the part on like, I find it fascinating because there's so much unknown that's out there on some of this stuff. And so like, yeah, personally, I agree with you. 99% of the code I'm probably going to get out of when I generate code is probably fine. It's just that 1%. And if you're a large enough target where it's like, SCO, I'm going to sue because I own because I own Linux, right? Therefore, you put yourself front and center of some major court litigation because like we can sue you where other smaller companies like you're not worth it. Type of bit like that. So I think that's kind of where we were concerned.
Like on the vendor risk assessments, if a lot of the vendors are asking, what's your, open source things? Are they going to start requesting, what are you using for your AI?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I think in a policy, one of the things that you have in our policy is if anything is derived by AI, that we have to disclose that to our customer. It's like, that's part of our policy and commitment back to our customers. So at least there's something that's being like, here's my claim that was rejected. It was like rejected by AI. So like, oh, all right, well, there you go. Now I know. Kind of like when they denied my wife's anesthesia for when she had a C-section. It was like, wait, what? What do you want to put a stick in her mouth and just, bite down on this? So, but it was just rejected by automation, right? They know that if I reject X number of claims, a percentage won't actually file an appeal. So I think, kind of like, how much of that may happen in the future. So if you get denied on your insurance claim, maybe it was done through AI, so maybe just appeal.
Good point, and great discussion. When we were talking the other night, Craig said, you're gonna find that we start this discussion and hour and a half will fly by and then.
We're past that, but yeah.
Just flew by.
Yeah.
So definitely, we could dig a lot deeper into this topic. There are a lot of other avenues that we could go down, but just to wrap things up, and then we'll break. Hopefully, eat some more pizza and then have a little bit of networking here locally. But to close things up, as you look at the future, and you can answer one of two ways, right? What is the future of generative AI look like to you, and where do you find it exciting? And or if you want to go on the flip side, risk of generative AI as we go into the future, and what keeps you up at night in the future versus now?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to it. I think that the fact that our adversaries are actively using this, I think that's the part that, I think the days of thinking that it's, a lovingly handcrafted experience of someone trying to hack your network are long gone. That's been the way for decades now. It's all scripted. I just think that with AI, it's just going to make things just a little bit more, in the hands of the wrong people could just make things a little bit more. So therefore, what keeps me up is how adaptive are we? How fast can your organization pivot? And it's not just pivoting to generative AI, it's to every new threat that's out there, because the whole world is open up to this thing, right? And so I think that's probably what keeps me awake. Not too much these days, I've got a bad back. So that cybersecurity doesn't keep me awake as much as my back, but I think that's probably, at least in the future, is what I see more of it. It's just that organizations are just gonna have to get better across the board and everything.
I'll say, the people who will lose sleep are the cybersecurity people. Everyone else will be excited to use the tools.
Amen.
But from my perspective, with maybe a hint of optimism, right? I think it has the ability to really, like, I think you mentioned initially, it was like, the internet was like this huge thing. And now this is like the next big thing. So curious to see what comes of it, I think there will be plenty of opportunity for cybersecurity folks to have jobs, for auditors as new frameworks come out, for consultants to advise organizations. But risk is always going to be there. There's no way to eliminate it. So it's just how we look at it and handle it.
Awesome. Brent?
So I'm going to take a different approach. Completely agree with both of what you said, but I want to bring a different light to this. And I think that is the future of generative AI falls to all of us, all of our biases, our cultures, our ethnicities, the way that we think, the way that we respond. It falls to all of us to be good stewards within this platform and what it can bring to the planet. That's what I see the future of generative AI. And I think that we as a people need to come together to root out some of those biases, root out some of those, those irresponsible responses that we may get, right? Because it's up to us to drive the right behaviors ethically and morally so that we can land a generative AI platform that we can all be proud of and share and drive things that have the right impact for us, not only economically within our companies, but globally. So I'm gonna stop there, but I think that's the future, and it's really up to us to take that responsibility on.
For me, I don't know yet, but I think the opportunity for innovation excites me. And I think that's gonna be, I think innovation will just increase exponentially. And I just don't feel like we know yet where it's gonna take us, but there's gonna be a lot of, I think, new markets created, and new opportunities. While we were talking, I was like, okay, well, we were talking about code and ownership of code. Well, what if there was someone created a repository and found a way to tag their code, like people like Elon Musk sold his first Twitter image, what did he call it? His first tweet.
The NFT thing.
NFT, yeah, NFT code or something. I don't know, and figure out a way to. It's in a repository. You're making money off the code you write because other people are using it. Yeah, I just think there'll be new markets created and new innovation. So it excites me because I get excited about innovation and technology. A little scary because of the bad actors and understanding, being in cybersecurity, understanding the other side and what the potential is there as well. But I'm excited based on what I feel is possible.
What did ChatGPT say?
I love this format. This was really fun.
You're probably like, I can't answer that, Dave. Yeah.
So
Can't do that,
what are
Dave. Yeah.
future risks of generative AI, maybe?
Just gonna say, what does the future hold?
Oh, there you go. Let's get some predictive modeling here,
So I don't know what they're even called.
yeah. Would you like to play a game?
Answers that way.
I know, yeah. I have to say, the memes on this have been fantastic. As they're giving presentations, everything from Skynet all the the way down. I mean, it's.
The future holds immense potential for advancements and transformative impact across various domains.
Yeah. I mean, I saw there was like a 60 Minutes report and they were showing about how it can like break down a protein. It was like, you know, like one of these proteins would be broken down, would be equivalent of a person's 4-year doctorate would map one of these, and they're like, it can do it in hours. And so you think about the medical advances, I think it's like, cool. All right, awesome. You
But it's
know,
only 46% correct.
yeah, I just want to make sure that that protein
That's
is,
the
yeah,
question.
I want the right protein, you know, they get it. But no, I think it's amazing. Like, that's, I think the part is like, there's so much possibility to it. And that's where I think it's just, we have to have the right governance in place, is really, like, and that's where the laws are coming in, because that's what probably scares me the most, because if it's not regulated, and now you've got people that can really start turning the knobs and start manipulating it, holy cow, like, this could get real.
But if it is regulated, and you talked about Sam Altman appearing before Congress,
Mhm.
he and Sundar are lobbying because they want to be the ones regulated.
Yeah.
Because if they can be the only ones regulated, they're the only ones who get a seat at the table.
Sure.
So.
Yeah,
It's
because
a two-sided.
it's the, well, we're the model you use because it's approved, right? Yeah. There's money behind this. There's huge, I mean, Microsoft invested how much money in just the OpenAI one? I mean, it was just like, you know, dropping.
There's also an issue of national security.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Our research and development budget is in the billions.
It's about our whole budget right there. So, yeah.
No, I think it's all great points, and you all can see why I bring a panel on instead of talking about this stuff myself. So big thanks to our panelists for taking the time. Round of applause to them. But I appreciate Ostrich Cyber Risk for sponsoring us. Like I said, we could, for sure, this event would not have happened without you this month, for sure. But excited with what generative AI offers us and what we're able to do. I firmly believe in my job currently, I've found about, let's say, 15 use cases of things that it can allow us to be way more effective in our job. And I think if everybody looks at what they do, there's probably that same possibility. But it needs some building to get there, and it needs some education to get there, and how you educate it is something that we have to figure out. One thing that we're going to do for this, we haven't done with previous events, but I think it's will make a big difference with this. There are a bunch of links that the panelists found as they were doing research and preparing. So we'll drop those into the LinkedIn group, so you can have easy access to those, and you don't have to go ask a generative AI engine what we were talking about. But we'll also have this recording that will be posted as well. Last thing I'll say is month of July, we're taking off. So we won't be doing an event in July, but we're gonna kick things off in the month of August. So please contact me or Ken or Vince if there are things you want to talk about, right? Do we want to spend a night talking about laws around generative AI, right?
Yep.
Any topics that you can think of that you would be interested in discussing, let us know. We'll pull together a group of folks to talk about it. We don't always do panel discussions. We bring in guest speakers. So if you have somebody that would be interested in a guest speaker, please let us know, and we'll get them queued up. But thank you so much for your time. Again, thanks to the panel. Enjoy the pizza, and thanks so much, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.